only got limited capacity on my camera. I haven't got high state tech. I haven't got first rate cameras or anything, so I have to do this over several videos, unfortunately, but that's how it is. So moving over to video number 2 now. So I'm just carrying on talking about going over ChrisPackham's documentary on ADHD inside our minds. So the next person that ChrisPackham meets is a woman in Hertfordshire, someone called Jo, who's 51, and she was diagnosed 2 years ago during the menopause. The menopause seems to be a time in a woman's life. I'm dreading a menopause, hopefully it's quite a number of years away from me. But the menopause seems to be a time in a woman's life where lots of things go pear-shaped. It's not for all women, so hopefully I'm one of the lucky ones when it hits, because it doesn't sound good. But not all women have a rough time during the menopause, but it seems that it's quite common for women to have a rough time during the menopause, and for things, because all the hormones are going all over the place, and that can be a time when things like ADHD, autism I suppose as well, can get worse. Hopefully not. I've already messed up enough, so I hope it doesn't happen for me. But yeah, he meets someone called Jo, and she's 51. She was diagnosed, so she would have been diagnosed in her late 40s during the menopause. And it said, yeah, she loves horses and dance music. She takes medication. She finds it helpful, and she lives with her wife Ali and her daughter Winnie, who is 6. And she also has another daughter who is 23, and her other daughter lives in Nottingham. And it says that horses are the one thing that she has committed to. So horses are her one thing that she's actually managed to commit to through her life. When she left school, she did a course on hotel management, but she didn't have any idea why. She found it very boring, and she nearly got thrown off the course as she was caught riding on the cleaning machines down the corridor when she did the housekeeping. That's an example of ADHD, impulsive behaviour, just doing something because you think, oh yeah, that's interesting, and obviously not really thinking through the consequences, and then getting into trouble. After that, she went and worked for solicitors, and she got bored of that. She got a job in London as a training manager for a computer company. She again left that again after 6 months. So yeah, she talked about the urge. She actually reminded me a bit of my grandmother, who I have a strong feeling was probably had something like ADHD. So it's quite interesting. She even looked a bit like my grandmother actually. It's quite interesting that. She was very, very impulsive and hyperactive. But yeah, anyway, she had an urge to chase novelty, and stimulation. So often ends up hopping from job to job, and she'd ended up trying 14 different careers. And she talks about how she was managing a project deadlines. She was managing project deadlines, audit reports to be done, lots of things that had to be planned and organised. And she had no idea why she was struggling until her friends started talking about ADHD. And her oldest daughter, a friend of her oldest daughter at university, was diagnosed with ADHD, and then her wife Ali had somebody at her work who was diagnosed, and she could see the same difficulties that person was having as she was. And she had never previously suspected it. She just thought she was forgetful and a bad person. And her dad told her that she's like a butterfly going from one thing or one flower to another, as he described it. When are you actually going to settle? When are you going to actually settle on when are you actually going to settle on something? His dad would say to her. So yeah, that was the second person that Chris met, and then he went to North London to meet Dr. Tony Lloyd, and Tony was diagnosed with ADHD in his late 20s, and he now campaigns for better support. And he describes it as being like a wall of distraction. Everything is calling for your attention, and he talks about something called the default mode network in the brain. So when you're focused on a task, your brain will naturally quieten down in other areas. Whereas with an ADHD brain, even when the person is focusing on something, the rest of the brain stays lit up, stays quite distractible in other words. And he says it's a bit like trying to watch 6 TVs all at once, when really you're only trying to watch one screen, but you can't filter out the other 5. And this is caused by lower levels of dopamine, which is an excitatory hormone, which helps to motivate us. So things like concentration, learning and memory can all be affected. And if you have lower levels of dopamine, you will also have lower levels of noradrenaline. And lower levels of noradrenaline correlate with things like anxiety and depression, things like that. So that's a bit of the sort of science, the sort of neurochemistry behind ADHD. So again, Chris went to Oxfordshire to meet Henry's parents, Henry being the first person that he spoke to in the programme, the young man Henry. And they describe his childhood, and apparently primary school was really good for him because he had short lessons. So primary school he seemed to be okay. For me it was the opposite, funny enough. For me primary school was, although I'll talk about that more in enough programme when I kind of link into my experiences. Actually I'll probably talk about it more in my other programme, but I'll just say that, yeah, that's a little bit different to me because primary school was where my problems were more noticeable, but then as I went to secondary school my problems were still there, but my parents kind of scaffolded it more, so it kind of became maybe a bit less noticeable. But yeah, anyway, so, but for Henry it's the other way around. Primary school was good for him, but secondary school, when he headed towards GCSEs, there was a lot more books, more structure, longer lessons, and he began to struggle. He couldn't sit down and learn the facts, so he couldn't sit down and learn the facts, like, you know, for revision and things like that. So he would just stand there, and his mother would say, "Henry, answer this question," while Henry hit balls down the garden. So, you know, he had to be like on his feet, you know, he couldn't just sit there and revise, he had to be like doing something else, being quite hyperactive. And then Henry came to his parent and he just said, "I think I might have ADHD." So that's interesting. So it's Henry himself who came to the realisation that he might have ADHD, not his parents. And his parents had, so that's how he got diagnosed ultimately. But his parents have zero idea about the state of his flat, and he doesn't think that his parents know him as much as they think they do. So the poem was the programme was a bit of an eye-opener for his parents, and that they got to see, you know, what was going on for Henry, parts of his life that he had kind of kept under lock and key. Again, Chris visits Bristol and he joins a workshop run by an ADHD artist, Leanne, and also joining is Professor Amanda Kirby, who's chair of the ADHD Foundation. And there's one person in the group who was interviewed, he's still waiting for a diagnosis, age 40, but when she approached the doctor said, "Are you sure you're not just jumping on the bandwagon? Did you just see a TikTok and think you might have ADHD?" Which obviously was quite a dismissive comment. Not good. He looked a bit at the underdiagnosis of women, similar in that respect to autism. It's also underdiagnosed of women, and he speaks to Amanda Kirby, and she talks about how waiting lists originally had a sort of gender bias, whereas women maybe have slightly different symptoms to men, maybe like things more like inattention, less hyperactivity, more in the way of inattention, dreaminess. For me, opposite, but I'll get on to that later. Things like anxiety as well might be more of a presenting symptom. I was actually very hyper when I was a kid, so I had more of a disruptive, kind of hyperactive, got into trouble kind of presentation as a kid. Not as an adult, that's toned down, but I'll get onto that in another video anyway. Because things do change as you get older, you just change, It's funny because when I was at a group and I was talking about how as a kid I was like quite disruptive, not in like a really kind of like bad way, but kind of, like a kid that was always sent out of a classroom in primary school, for walking around a classroom and basically just not doing the work and disrupting people. Person at group said she couldn't believe it because I come across now, I think, quite kind of not like that, because obviously I have changed. Like, you do change, you grow up. Obviously, everyone grows up. But yeah, it's interesting. Anyway, I digress. So getting back onto this. She talks about how girls maybe are seen more as like not focusing, not trying hard enough. Jo never handed in her homework on time, things like that, often told to stop talking and so on. And then, and at the end of the programme, each of the people in the programme may do a film to describe their experiences. So Henry's film, Henry described ADHD, actually I really liked his metaphor, or his way of describing it. Henry described ADHD as being like a tombola man, throwing balls at him. Like a tombola man throwing balls, the balls being like instructions. The balls representing instructions. Like a tombola man throwing balls at him constantly, completely randomly. For example, things like, now you need to renew your bike insurance. Like constantly kind of, a tombola man throwing like coloured balls at him. That was his metaphor for ADHD, which he acted out in his programme. And which is obviously very, very overwhelming because you can't really plan and you're constantly having like instructions being hurled at you, things you need to do, and you're not quite sure in what order maybe to do them, how to sequence them, all of those sort of things. You end up kind of getting so overwhelmed by them that you sort of end up, I guess, like, he didn't talk about task paralysis, but that's what I was thinking about, how, having all these balls being chucked at you constantly can result in kind of a state of kind of task paralysis where you just end up like procrastinating because you're not quite sure what to do and everything takes too much effort. You want to do it, but you just can't kind of get your brain into that gear, as it were. Sorry, where was I? And sometimes he says these balls are helpful, and sometimes, for example, the urge to research the world's biggest fish, maybe then, getting hyper-focused in that sort of tunnel vision, hours go by, not getting anything else done, maybe not so much. So yeah, and Joe also did a film, of course. I didn't write down what Joe's film was. I just thought Henry's film, it was just interesting when he described ADHD to being like a tombola man. I just liked that metaphor. Okay, so I'm going to stop now. I have got more to say about this programme because I want to kind of talk about more how my experience links in with some of the points. And there's also a programme, so I've only recently been diagnosed with ADHD. I was diagnosed with autism ages ago, but I'm still trying to make sense of how it all links together. And there it goes, another documentary that ChrisPackham did on dyslexia. That was interesting because I don't have dyslexia. I have dyscalculia, which is kind of like the maths equivalent. So it's interesting because I have some of the struggles that people with dyslexia have, which I think are kind of common across learning difficulties. But obviously it's like a kind of the sort of mirror opposite in some ways. Like for me, decoding comes easily. I'm really good at words and language, but I have some of the similar struggles in terms of like concentration, memory, that sort of stuff. So anyway, I'll get onto that in another video. But so I'll stop now because I've got more to talk about these videos as I delve deeper into them. So do let me know what you think, and thank you for watching.